my third favourite motorsport memory would probably have to be karting. It must have been around 2011, something like that. So a few years prior to it, I'd won the British Championship and a few other championships along the way. And I remember there was this big European race out in Belgium at the time. It was in Genk. Awesome circuit, firstly. And I begged my dad so much to do it, so much, because it was like, it would have been my first European race, but he was like, Jess, I can't afford it. And I was like, I was begging him, please let me do it. Please let me do it. Anyway, he gave in, and it was a double header round, basically. So you had a whole race meeting on Saturday and then a whole race meeting on Sunday. Yeah, so on the Sunday, which was the second round, I was actually poorly for the Saturday one. I didn't do the Saturday one. But I remember, so it was a bit of a disaster before it even went ahead. And I remember it was all fine. It was all dandy. I think I was starting 5th on the grid for the final, fast enough to win. So we were going for the win. And I remember being on the grid. So you take your karts down and there's like a parc fermé area where you have to put your tyres on. And so the tyres are kept by race control to make sure no one tampers with them or puts any softener or anything on them, I guess. So I put the slicks on, and in the distance, there is this massive black cloud. Like, it is going to absolutely pee it down, right? So within 2 minutes, we've got the slicks on, we're ready to go. We've got 5 minutes till we need to be on the grid and set and ready to go. And I swear to God, it rained so hard. I have never seen anything like it in my life for only for a very short amount of time, but the track was absolutely soaked. So everybody's rushing around putting wets on, taking their slicks off, putting wets on. And I'm looking at my dad thinking, why are we not putting wets on, Dad? And he just turns around and says, Jess, I couldn't afford to buy any. We don't have any wets to put on. And I'm like, right, okay. So I just accepted it anyway. So I started thinking in my head, right, so I'm starting from 5th. Most people around me are on wets. So the grid was about 35 of us on the grid. And back in those days, you have drop down bumpers now, but it used to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit. And so we put it on the grid. I'd say 70 to 80% of people were on wets. And I remember sitting on the grid in 5th place, looking at my dad thinking, what are we doing? Like, we've messed up so hard here. And literally a minute before they waved the green flag, it was bright sunshine and like a completely different circuit. And the track was steaming. It was like just drying so quickly. It was still kind of half wet, half dry. Anyway, so we went out for the formation lap. And I knew that if I started in 5th, because you're literally like that push on the start, I knew that if I started in 5th place, I was going off at the first corner. I knew it. There was one other person at the front on slicks. I mean, there was several dotted around the grid, but there was me and one other on slicks at the front. And so I pretended I had an issue on the rolling up lap. I put my hand, like, looking at the engine, looking at it, what's wrong? There's something wrong with it. So I took myself to the back of the pack because I knew I was going off at the first corner if I didn't. Come up to the lights, and all this time it's drying and drying and drying. So I come around, everybody on slicks went off, even a few people on wets. So I'm there at the back. So I'm probably in about 15th position after the start. Every lap it got drier and drier and drier, and I can feel myself. So I went backwards after a little bit after that, and then I started going forwards like rapidly. And by lap 8 or so, I was literally hunting down the leader. I was in 2nd, and I overtook him, and I must have won the race by half a lap, something like that. And it was crazy, all because my dad couldn't afford to buy wets. And I remember literally coming around the last corner at Genk, my dad is laying, because he doesn't smoke anymore, but he used to. He's laying on the barrier like this, with a fag in his hand, going like that, and his feet up. And I was just thinking, you're so jammy, so jammy. I'm so happy, literally. And there was the world champion there. I think it was actually the world champion that finished second, but he went off he was on slicks, but he went off at the start, and I lost so much time at the start. And that, to me, that is something that the image of my dad laying on that barrier with a fag in his hand, with his feet up like this, will stay with me forever. My second favourite motorsport memory was 2019, Brands Hatch, the final round of the W Series race calendar. I had an awful season prior to the last round, and I'd played it. I had a DNF, and a few things hadn't fallen in my favour throughout the season, and basically the top 12 in the championship made it through to the following season, and I had to finish in X place to make it through to, and I had to finish in front of someone else, and then they had to have a bad race, but it didn't matter if someone else had a good race. And it was a little bit confusing, but I remember I wasn't literally on the last lap. I think I finished 6th or 7th, and I was like, over the radio to my engineer, have I made it through? Have I made it through? And he replied, I think so. And I'm like, what do you mean you think so? Like, am I through or am I not? And he kept going, I think so, I think so. So on the final lap, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or what. And I remember coming through, because I had quite a few friends at Brands Hatch, because it was our home race. Pulling up, getting out of the car, and my friends running over, and they're like, you made it through. And I'm like, are you sure? Don't tell me I've made it through if I haven't. And they're like, 100%, we've worked it out, we've worked this out, we've worked that out, 100% you're through. And I just remember firstly not believing them, and just being so relieved and happy that it had finally come together on the last race, and something had fallen in my favour, and I did what I needed to do to make it through to the next season. So yeah, that was on it. That was, I felt like I'd won the world championship, but I hadn't. All I'd done is finished 11th in a championship. To be honest, throughout the whole season, my speed was never the issue. I'd not been racing for a very long time before the start of the season, and I'd always go out, apart from the first round where admittedly I wasn't quite quick enough, but every other round I'd always go out in both free practices and be top 3 quickest, and if I wasn't top 3, I'd be top 5. So there wasn't, in my mind, I was quick enough to make it happen. And realistically, I shouldn't have been as quick as I was, because I was just so far behind on experience compared to everybody else. But what would happen is I'd get to qualifying, and something would happen, and I'd always be right down the bottom in qualifying, and I could never explain it. Then that made the races hard work for me. And I think it was a combination of, because I never went testing or anything, I never knew how to get the best out of the new tyres. And I was putting myself under a lot of pressure because I knew I was quick enough, and qualifying was when it really counted. It just wasn't all coming together. And I actually saw a sports psychologist who instantly sorted me out. The problem wasn't 100% fixed, but it was a remarkable improvement. So from the last 3 races is really where I started to, get there. But I was in 5th in Norrisring, and with like 2 laps to go, and I had a coil pack failure. So unfortunately I DNF'd from that one. And then I think I finished 6th or 7th at the following race. And I knew that all I needed to do was kind of be 6th, 7th, something like that. Kind of depended where everybody else went. And I knew that I had the pace for it. So I tried, just listened to, my sports psychologist. I worked a lot with him. And we came up, almost with a plan, and we stuck to it really. And admittedly, I had the pace to be a little bit higher, but we certainly made made steps in the right direction. So yes, it was a bit of pressure, but all I could do was drive as quick as I could. I genuinely think that he believed in me, and he just, I never met him face to face. It was all over Zoom, because he lived in Sweden, I think it was. But even just hearing his voice just calmed me slightly. So before the race, I actually rang him, and the signal was terrible for him at the time, and I was freaking out because I couldn't hear him properly and all this stuff. But he settled me down a bit. We went through a bit of a process, and him and my friends and family just said, just go and enjoy it, which I did. And I remember actually being on the last lap, and I'd caught someone, and my engineer had told me that I need to get past this person to make it through. So I actually spent the whole lap thinking that I wasn't getting through the thought did enter my brain, and I was quite far behind, but I was there. I thought, do I just go for a kamikaze move, and if it comes off, I've made it through, and if it doesn't, I've not lost anything because I'm not going through anyway. Anyway, I didn't quite get close enough to do it, but luckily I didn't, because I'd made it through anyway. Can you imagine if I'd have gone for this kamikaze move and speared her off, and I would have been through anyway. So my favourite motorsport memory, and this has been difficult to choose from all of the memories, but so since I've been a young girl, I don't know why, before I even knew what racing was really, I'd always been drawn to British touring cars, and that's always where I've strived to be. And I never thought it would be possible, because it's a big budget, and budget is something that I've struggled to get. I don't come from large family wealth or anything like that, so getting sponsors on board and stuff, especially in these times, are very difficult. And luckily for me anyway, PowerMax had pulled out of the season due to COVID at the beginning, and they were looking to put a different driver in every round of the season. And I got the phone call to do one. And I was thinking to myself, God, where am I going to find the budget for this? Yeah, luckily I had some amazing sponsors come on board in Farstar, Motorsport Legal, Clapham North MOT, and EB Watches. They helped me get together for the race and made it achievable for one race. And I literally had the best time of my life. It was everything that I dreamed for and more, and it's just made me want it even more for a full season. I think I was a little bit disappointed with the result, but I think everybody around me was thinking that I overachieved. But I would have been, the only reason that they said to me, PowerMax said to me, if you can get in the top 20 in your first race meeting, you have done an amazing job. And we got in the top 20, but we had pace for top 12. It's such a competitive championship that you can't just, and we had extra ballast on that guest drivers have to use and stuff. But I can't actually still believe that it happened. And I just remember sitting on the grid before, and I'm saying over the radio, guys, I don't know if I need a shower or sit on the toilet, or if I need a wee, or if I need to run around and scream. Like, it was just the most amazing feeling, and that's what I've worked for my whole life. And now I'm just so excited at the prospect of having a full season, so I'm going to try and put that all together. And that's what I've dreamed of since being a little girl, British touring cars. And although it was only one race, I still made it happen. Looking back, I made a great relationship with the team. PowerMax were outstanding to work with. And if there's one thing that it was all a bit of a blur, to be honest. It still is, because I felt like I waited an absolute eternity for it to come, and then it felt like it was all over and done with within 5 minutes. I am my worst enemy, not just in racing, just in life in general. I put myself under so much pressure, and just to do myself proud more than anything, and to make all of my dreams, make it everything that I wanted it to be. I guess maybe I should have taken a little bit a step back and just enjoyed it. And although I did enjoy it, maybe I was chasing something that was never achievable anyway. Um, Although I guess it was, because we had the pace for top 12. I would have liked to have been top 15, which I think in my first weekend would have been outrageous. And going by the pace, it was possible. But maybe I was just a little bit race rusty and it didn't happen. But I literally had the best time of my life, and it's just made me want more.